Welcome back, everybody. John, I can see your PowerPoint. So John Hawkins from Waterford just getting ready here to get going. Morning, John.
Good morning, Ciaran. Thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. Welcome back again. So one of our regular contributors now.
Yes. So can I just check? Can you see my full screen of my presentation? Are you seeing my notes?
I can see your notes and your present and the PowerPoint and the notes in one slide.
Bear with me a second. I'm just going to switch to a different screen if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. And also, I'd like to welcome Ciara here this morning to present on OSI as well. You've presented a few times before, Ciara, as well, not for OSI, but for ourselves over the years. And there's Gareth back.
Right.
Who's Polly, John?
Don't give things away then, Ciara. Now, you got my full screen or not?
I've got a screen, yeah, but there's nothing on it, only a big picture of a coloured map.
Okay, I'm going to have to shut my laptop. You're going to have to do without seeing me, I think, because this is what may cause a problem. So 1 second.
Yeah, the other day. Yeah.
That's fine, John.
Right.
I can see your slide now. Hopefully everybody else can, yeah?
Yeah, so you can just see my slides,
yeah?
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'll make a start. So sorry, thanks for having me, Ciaran. So I'd like to talk today about how we've been using FME to improve public services, and really how we've been improving slowly and improving processes one transformer at a time. So I will now. Things have stopped working with me on my keyboard. No, here we go. Yeah, so for those that don't know me, my name is John Hawkins. I've worked in the public sector now for about 20 years, and in the last 13 years within Ireland. And since coming to Ireland, I've started using FME for pretty much any project that comes across my desk. And in recent years, I've been using FME Server as well. If you hear any extra noises today, this is my new co-worker, Polly, but she's currently asleep sitting next to me, so we should be okay. So what I really wanted to do was actually pose a question. Are the workspaces that we develop and schedule really delivering what our customers need? And the reason I ask this is because often we develop what we think are clever workspaces, but often this is done in isolation. We're often asked by line managers to develop something for us, or we take it on our own initiative and we respond to a perceived problem. And very often we produce something that's worthwhile, or we schedule it, or we set it up to be run on demand, and we can see that it's used. But really, I want you to take a step back and think, could they be doing more to make your colleagues' lives easier on the processes they work on, and then, and in turn, deliver better customer services? Because your end customers could be your internal customers, but also for ourselves as local government, the actual members of the public and the business community. So just going back to how I used to develop workspaces, often it might be a line manager or a supervisor is sitting in their office thinking about the process that they're dealing with on a daily basis. They've seen some examples of FME being used to maybe help housing or planning or the financial sections. And they've heard me going on about it every time they see me about how great FME is, why we should continue to pay IMGS the money to look after it, and what it can do to help our organisation run better. They might start thinking about, well, how can I take the data that I've got in my back-end database and put that on a map and bring it together and combine some information, maybe around housing stock. I might want to get some analytics. So if we keep housing stock as an example, the number of houses allocated, the number that are vacant. And then they know that we can do great cross-referencing. So I might be cross-referencing my housing database with my financial system to make sure that the rents have been set the same in both systems, and to see about different rent balances and new houses coming on stream. And then maybe once I've done all that, the manager might say, well, I'd like an output as a spreadsheet. I'd like it to show a summary of all that information, and actually then can I have another spreadsheet that shows this, and can I have another spreadsheet that shows that? And the next thing is, you're outputting 4 or 5 spreadsheets. Once you've gone through a couple of processes and got that workspace and the spreadsheet looking how they want it, they then say, well, actually, that's great. Can you email that to me every Monday morning? And actually, can you email Ciaran and Frank and Johnny and the rest of the team as well. And this obviously is firing into inboxes then sometimes on a daily, weekly and monthly basis. But is this really how we should be improving processes? The other year I went back to college and I learned a bit more about change management and process improvement. And it got me thinking about how we actually do this work and maybe more that we could be doing to help our end customers. And so I'd just like to talk you through this and give you an example, and hopefully you maybe go away and think about how you might develop your next reusable scheduled workspace. So at Waterford City Council, we've now entered we have a process improvement team. And here we're working with our different sections to improve the processes that we work on. So we have members of staff that have been working on processes for a number of years. But how can we make things easier? Process improvement looks at identifying the value for the customer. And what is meant by that? Well, really anything that we do at work, it's something that someone's willing to pay for or what they want as an output. So it could be a housing application. Somebody wants us to be assessing their housing application, reading the file, and then sending out the decision. What they don't want to be paying for is the member of staff walking around the office trying to find the filing cabinet or changing the toner. So really the value is when we're actually doing the work that's adding the value. If you think about manufacturing a car, it's putting the wheels on a car because that's what the person wants. Process mapping also says, look to identify the whole process, map the stream. So often or not, we might be asked to develop a workspace to do a particular thing at one end of the process. But what process improvement and change management really say is we should consider the whole process before making a change, because we actually might introduce another error along the line or another blockage. Or indeed, we might be able to do much more if we understood the whole process. And indeed, that's why I want to take us later on, is how FME can do much more than maybe we think it can. Process improvement is about creating flow, and by eliminating this waste, removing unnecessary movement. So simply put, if it's on your own or like a production line, it's having your tools and your spare parts next to you, not at the other end of the warehouse where you have to go and get them. So you're looking at removing any unnecessary waste or movement. And then also responding then to the pull of the customer. Some of you may have heard of just in time, just getting the information when you need it. In the example I showed earlier, the line managers love an old email being sent around with a spreadsheet, which nowadays isn't so great because I'm always now concerned about GDPR and emails flying around with the spreadsheets attached. So really people should go and get information. They should download it when they need it. And then when somebody gets to a point, they should be able to get that information and not go searching in their inbox for an email they may have received a week ago. And once you've then improved your process, maybe developed your workspace, pursue perfection. Well, actually, that's great. But what is still slow within that process? What can we do to actually improve that for the person? And what the whole methodology here, for anyone who wants to look into it more, is around lean. And you might have heard of things called Six Sigma. And there's principles and methods about carrying out workshops, and you can look into this. And lean, very much for anybody that's interested, came from the shop floors of Toyota when they were looking to compete with the likes of Ford, of how to make themselves one of the leading car manufacturers. But now it's being used within not only the health service, but within public sector. And I think it has such great applications for us within local government. So I'm just going to take you now through an example of how we actually look to apply this within Waterford City and County Council and what we found from the results. So the next time I had a line manager that had a good idea, I said we will go about and do things differently. And in this instance, it was a new line manager going into our development management section and around processing of planning applications. Here, following the merger in 2014, there was a lack of standardized assessment formats. So the production of the draft planners report, making the recommendation. And final decision, and more consistency was required. And they were aware that time was being wasted creating a Word document every time, copying and pasting information. And could something be done? And having heard of FME and seeing it help other areas, could I assist? So I said, certainly, but I said, I'd like to go about this a bit differently. I'd like to understand the whole process, not just take what you're telling me over the telephone or in an email, but actually go and see what it is, how the process works. And so together, working with the staff, we mapped the entire process, looking from the start of the process to the end and looking at all the different people involved. And then once we identified areas within that, we then looked into more detail and broke those steps down to actually look at the hidden wastes and what could be done to alleviate that. So actually looking at people and how they work and what they expected. And then only once all that knowledge was gathered, did I develop an FME workspace, which, while complicated with over 300 transformers, I could develop quite quickly because I now knew exactly what I thought the people needed. Any assumptions that I had about how that process worked were gone. And I now could actually picture in my mind what transformers could be done to do that. So this is a workshop now of actually going about and creating a process map. And it should be noted that process improvement is much more than just obviously developing IT technology to assist it. It can be everything from moving the desks and chairs around to making things flow better, processes away from IT, and obviously IT can help in areas. But here you can see post-it notes on the team behind that are actually mapping out the process. The yellows are the different steps as we go along, and orange are the different decisions that have to be made. And the pink ones were then identifying what could be done to improve. From this, the team take away a process map, which looks like this, that maps the start of the planning application coming in to the end. And when going through this, sure enough, there was the planner's report. And when they described how the planner's report was produced and the Word document created and how they had to gather information, sure enough, I could see plenty of applications for FME. But because I sat down with them and they talked about the whole process, I realized there was a whole gap around site visits and how the team were actually writing down latitudes and longitudes onto the back of case files before putting them into their car and typing them into their sat-nav, or how some were putting post-it notes onto maps on a wall and then taking a photograph of it to know where to go. So here, thinking immediately, well, FME can do something here, and maybe along with ArcGis Online. And then also, once understanding the whole process, also then starting to realize that a lot of time was being spent about allocating applications, about trying to work out where applications were occurring within the administrative area, and that much more monitoring was required. And when working with process improvement, people need to know what's in process, understand what's coming through, and the numbers being dealt with. And so this is another key area. So what did we do? I'm going to continue to focus on the planning report just for example. What we actually did there was I then went away and sat down with the team and carried out what some might call a time and motion study, but really was just sitting next to the person and watching how they work, how they produce this report to get a better understanding. And I know now it's a bit different with the times that we're in, but sharing screens through Teams can do a very similar thing. So what does this show? Value add. This is them actually assessing the report and adding in information. Only 39% of their time producing the draft planners report was spent adding value. Watching them, I discovered there was 3 ways of working. 3 planners had 3 different sets of wording. 3 templates were being used. I discovered that 50 seconds were being spent around a problem that could be fixed. And this was where an email was being generated, actually using FME for a link to take them off to a particular planning application and present that information. But actually the link was broken. And rather than telling us that it was broken, they were spending 50 seconds then going to a search box, entering in the number and revealing the record. While that might not seem a lot, when you're working on applications day in, day out, those seconds add up. And that's what process improvement is all about. It's removing that wasted time. I discovered that there was underutilization of resources. They were copying and pasting text that had already been inputted into our planning application system, iPlan, and pasting it into Word documents, which we all know that copying and pasting isn't a great way of working, and mistakes can occur. But also, if somebody's already spent the time typing it in, somebody else shouldn't be spending the time copying and pasting it, or in one instance, actually retyping it. So the planners have been, they've trained for a particular job, and they should be spending as much time making that assessment. Non-value added unnecessary motion. This is opening and closing windows, browser windows, going to the different areas of the planning system. The more times they click on it, waiting to find the right information, and then going back to the Word document, over 95 mouse clicks that were potentially not required. So how did that look? Well, what they pretty much were starting with was with this blank Word document, that they'd go to the iPlan system, find the information they needed to create the report, copy and paste it in there because there was no standard report that did what they needed, looking at consultants and responses, then typing all that information in and going to the GIS to find out more information. So how does FME help? Well, we can use things such as word transformers, but importantly, we can use readers. that we can pass in our planning application number and go and gather our information from iPlan. Go to all the different windows that they were opening and closing, get the data that they require, and put it into a structured, agreed format that then can be taken and inserted into word transformers. Here it's adding information to a particular table at the beginning of the report. We can then create conclusions and standard text where we can then input variables and attributes along the way. We can then include standard text as well that we agree with the planners to insert in different elements. So here we're going to show one around the site notice, that if the site notice was present, this line of text went in. A simple, quick thing, but it's something the planner no longer has to think about. And also we discovered that the planners themselves were actually carrying out some analysis whereby, and you'll see it here now highlighted at the beginning of what is now a 10-page report, FME has gathered and gleaned the areas highlighted in yellow from the system and calculated where those items highlighted in the site description. They went and looked at which settlement it was near, done more recent in this instance. They got the hectare site 1.2, but also they were then calculating angles of the nearest road in the road schedule. And here we then just with some simple transformers did that all for them, worked out whether it's southwest and removed that for them. But it's also worth pointing, FME has created all of that Word document from the header at the top to the text within. But they were also doing spatial analysis. They were going to the map and having to now consider over 60 plus constraints of information and gather that information and put it into the Word document to make their assessment. So going to the map, they were then clicking on that, viewing the particular application, and then putting it into the report. What can we do here? Well, again, a feature reader. Here we can pass in, we gather the site boundary that's been captured for that particular planning application. And because we don't want to put waste in our workspace, if we just take that particular one boundary, we can use feature readers and pass that boundary in. And so that we can be effective, we're not reading in all the features from a particular data set, considering we're now looking at over 60 different data sets. They could be from web services or hosted locally. Because we just pass in that feature and we can wrap a buffer around it if we need be, we've got a very quick, efficient workspace with no waste in it. So we can do contains and intersects, and then take the outputs of that, format the information into a logical worded format that we can then pass through and into the word transformers that we looked at earlier. And here we can then put them into a zoning list for the planner then to review. And how does that look in the report? Well, it looks like this. Here what we do is we put all that information in. It's worth noting that this is a draft for the planner. The idea is here that they check and verify this information, okay? But what they can do is they can remove things that aren't relevant and keep things that are, and of course add in anything else that they feel that needs to be there. But based on working with them and looking at all the different ways that they carry out their analysis and the wording of how we might present that, we can automate that and put it in there ready for them. And also we can go off and help them with the Habitats Directive, which is a very standard part of each application. And we can go off there and see if there's any potential effects there with distance and analysis as well. So a new one best way. We've now created something that's on demand, standard and systematic. The user now goes to FME server, they enter in the planning application number, the type of application it is, and then an on-demand email is sent to them with the report using all the latest information in the system with links that work out to the right systems. Now that Gavin has shown us this morning that we can also write that to SharePoint, that's the better place to put it, and that's where we'll be going once that section moves to Office 365. And that report then, it will be sitting in SharePoint there, ready to be used and reviewed to create that final decision. Because we've made sure the workspace has no waste, it's 8 clicks of the mouse, and it is produced in 60 seconds. So going back to before, I said that before, staff spent 39% of their time on a valued activities. And luckily now, after we then carried out some post-analysis, we've now increased that to 86%. Because we've removed waste, opening and closing those windows, producing that standard Word document. And you can see there's other things to be done. But because, we also then have additional time savings. 41% of their time is that they're now processing this part of the application quicker, so they can spend more time on other activities now that we are seeing buoyancy and more applications coming into the area. But we didn't stop there, because then we noticed that we needed other things to assist them in the process. We then, after we finished that part of the project, we then went and created a dashboard, removing all the unnecessary emails about planning application stats that were firing around each week. Here we used some simple FME transformers to do some date calculations, so that we could basically show planning applications at different stages in the process, and they could plan and allocate accordingly, particularly around leave and availability. We also then did the site visit app. We produced using ArcGis collector. FME now publishes and writes to ArcGis online every night. Using date transformers as well, we basically tell them if they've got, how many days they've got left to visit a site, so we go within the statutory time. They can then attach photographs, and we can link that information back in. So I really encourage all of you to take a moment to think about taking your passion and take it to where the people know best, which in Japanese is called the gemba. This is the real place. So where the work is done, where your colleagues do the work. Understand how they work on their process, because I believe here you will find many opportunities to assist them using different FME transformers to help improve the process that they work on, make their lives easier, and of course, in turn, help us deliver better public services. And considering local government sector in Ireland has over 1,000 services, and this is something the LGMA are cataloguing at the moment, there's plenty of places where FME can potentially help us improve. If you have any questions after this, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, John. That was excellent. That's just, I think, a fantastic use of how things should be done, and not just delving into a workspace and trying to throw things together. Actually taking that approach to understand the issues and the value, and even there's light shining on you like godlike at the minute. So just to add to that, but that's fantastic.
I honestly just think while we think that, I mean, we use FME an awful lot here, but I've just with the time it's gone on now, I get copied into every FME workspace email that's generated every day, just to make sure they're all running. And I just think, well, if I'm a user sitting at the other end of it that's receiving that email in, that's not how you improve a process. It's really getting users going, getting the information, drawing it down on demand. And I say, when you sit down with people, and while it might seem an unnecessary step and you're taking extra time, I can guarantee you'll sit there, and as someone's showing you something, you will say, there's a transformer that can help you do that. I didn't understand that's how you did it until you showed me. And also, people aren't always very good at describing exactly how they work. And if you do it in a friendly manner and sit down and let them show you, people will want to show you how they work, and it will very quickly reveal great inner workings and really help you remove any of those assumptions when you're developing your workspaces.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. Thanks, John.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next session, which is myself and Gavin, which will talk through analytics and FME. And now, just to give you kind of an update, we are getting questions. We haven't taken them. We will have a bit of extra time during the session that we had down for Ciara for distance deduct, because we're doing a shorter session in that because it's us doing it. So we'll definitely take some of the questions then that we haven't handled, and we will also come back to any questions at the end if we haven't covered any, or we'll email them out. So myself and Gavin, thanks again, John. That was brilliant. So myself and Gavin are going to talk about the FME Analytics, and today's treatment for our spa is to connect systems in FME is as easy as connecting to a relaxation in a spa. So we're going to give you true location intelligence with FME, talk about the new Snowflake data warehouse support and how FME manages that, look at Sisense Analytics, and then Gavin and Aditya put together an excellent predictive analytics demonstration, which we'll focus on at the end. So with IMGS now, we have a location intelligence platform. So we've been talking about FME as the glue to bring the enterprise together. Snowflake is a cloud data warehouse that we're delighted to be a partner. They were recently IPO'd this month. It was the biggest cloud IPO ever. So it is a fantastic technology that has really taken off globally. And we're the Sisense visualization BI partner for Ireland as well. So Snowflake is the first data warehouse built for the cloud. Because it's for the cloud, it's a complete SQL database in the cloud managed for you. So zero management, can use all of your data. You can put all of your users onto it, and you only pay for what you use. And it has a capability called live data sharing, which has been enhanced this year by now adding the Snowflake marketplace, where other people are putting their data up there to be used for your analytics. And with FME, we can actually, with any database really, with FME, you can connect to your data. It now supports a growing level of cloud solutions, and means that synchronization and automation from your data sources to your databases is easier than ever. So with FME and Snowflake, we can move data from local records responsively, move the information up so we can monitor and troubleshoot, and then schedule synchronizations to the central data store. And all this can mean that your applications have been integrated. This is what FME has been doing for years, but actually the change now is the ability to support these cloud data warehouses. With FME, with Sisense, we have the ability to simplify complex data and run data from anywhere to run everywhere. So in Sisense, you can do self-service data modeling, connect to any data, model it in a self-service way, and no code. For those who do like to use code, we do have code-driven data transformations. So people can do their data transformations code first via Data Workbench. And also Sisense supports a hybrid data experience. So you can have powerful live data connections to things like Snowflake, but also you can use the in-memory engine to connect to on-premise data and provide it at high speeds. With Sisense, you can infuse analytics everywhere. So you can create and embed data stories and dashboards. You can create an interactive experience. So analytics are built-in processes that allow deep collaboration, which we're kind of seeing this morning. Being able to explain narratives, so making insights easy and accessible to everybody. Again, very much in line with what John is saying, being able to make people that they can drill into their data and get what they need. And being able to integrate, one of its strengths of Sisense is being able to embed the Sisense analytics into other applications via SDKs, iframes, or APIs. With Sisense, it has the ability to create pulse alerts. So if you have KPIs built into your dashboards, that you'll be alerted and an action can be taken. And also, as you see this morning, Sisense has the ability to build actions and workflows inside the dashboards using Sisense blocks. And this is what Aditya and Gavin have done. So, Gavin, I'm going to hand over to you.
Cool, thank you. I was going to say, this one just is a very high level, just to explain the technology we're using, just how we're pulling it together. As Ciaran's mentioned, all of the data you'll see is coming from Snowflake, and that's Spatial now. So 2020's added Spatial support in there for Snowflake. So we can now not only store all of our non-spatial data up in the cloud, but we can start to store the spatial data up there as well. This is hugely powerful. It's such a fast database that, even though it's living up on the cloud, we can do a lot of spatial processing now up there, front load the answers, and then just get FME to actually take the data it needs to process, making it a bit quicker. Obviously, we have Sisense for the dashboarding, so it's a really nice way of just visualizing all of the data we're talking about. It just makes it a little bit easier for people to understand what's going on with our data sets. And obviously, then we have FME orchestrating all of this process. So it's pulling data, doing the analysis, and then writing the data that Sisense is then using for that visualization. And then lastly, at the bottom, we're just using Jira and things like Office 365, really to exemplify how you can use FME to actually start to generate actions from that data. So we're writing to them because they have nice web APIs that we can generate a ticket, for example, on the Jira side. But this can be any application, any works orders application that has a HTTP kind of API interface, we can now start to interact with. And those APIs really open up the scope for joining all of these solutions together. They're really, really critical as modern enterprise level application. And obviously Jira is just a nice example of how we can do that. And it's very simple. So what we were looking at is taking sort of wooden poles, those traditional low voltage wooden poles you'll see all over every country, wherever you go, that carries the power lines or low voltage power lines. And they're difficult to manage. They get stuck out in the field. People forget about them. They've got a very long lifespan. But obviously, things happen, weather events and things come in. So, it's how can we better analyze those poles? And you can kind of see the spread we're looking at just there on the right. And we've got a basic dashboard that shows them. So if we just jump on one slide. Thank you. There are some inspection challenges. This was just taking an example. So if you have 1,000 miles of low voltage network, pole spacing of 250 feet, that gives you about 21,000 poles. So if you inspect 12% of that per year, it's $100. You're at 25K per annum to inspect it. So that's traditionally somebody going out, looking at the wooden pole, maybe with a little GIS application, going, well, is it still there? Has it fallen over? Has some bird built a nest in it and things? It's very basic. There's not a lot of sophistication that goes into some of these inspections sometimes. Like I say, if there's anybody on who knows LV poles, don't hold the numbers too hard, but I think they're pretty indicative of the kind of prices and challenges you will face with those things. And I know we've done work in the past with LV networks, and yeah, they can be a challenge to find and inspect. People have lost entire lines of poles in the past. So this will just give you a simple idea of the dashboard. So the first kind of step was to say, well, we know the surveys have been taken. We know all of these things have existed in the past. So, how can we actually start to present that? So we have some high level view of what our data looks like. What is the asset health that we have for these things? So Aditya has gone through, he's taken all of that data, and there's a huge amount of it floating around in the Snowflake database. And then he started to apply a little bit of modeling to say, well, can we take the various different conditions and actually come up with an asset health value? So we can say that, these poles here currently are at risk. These ones here are fine. We know these ones are good. We're probably not going to worry too much about these. And then we can start to present that information. So, FME is going away in the background. It's taking that Snowflake data. It's working out those algorithms. It's adding the health status to them, writing all that back up into Snowflake that obviously then we can visualize through the sort of Sisense dashboard and things. So it's that kind of harmony between the different products coming in. And you can see there, we've got those internal measures and things as part of that, which is how we're starting to score the different poles. So I just get you to jump on a slide.
Okay.
Thank you. But obviously that's good for predicting sort of very linear decay. You can say, well, okay, if we inspected a pole in 1998 and it was in this condition, by 2000 it was in this, and 2010 it was here. You could probably start to work out a rough model that will say our assets are going to decay at this kind of level. But obviously, they're out and exposed. You're not always going to have that nice standard decay. You're going to have a lot of non-uniform events. Weather probably being the biggest one for Ireland with these kind of things. If you get a big storm comes in, all of those wooden poles get blown over. You may not really know until somebody phones up and tells you. These are not sophisticated poles. They're very much analog in a digital world. There's no IoT, nothing clever. It's literally somebody has to go and check and say, my, electricity's not on, or somebody somewhere will notice that that's gone off. So weather can be a really key factor to some of these things. So what we then decided is, well, actually, can we start to monitor and forecast that and use our modeling to actually start to forecast how our poles are going to behave and maybe start to get ahead of some of these events. So if I just get to jump on a second. Thank you. So the first, we can use FME to connect up to Met-Éireann. We can actually get the forecast location for each one of those poles coming through. So, we can build a fairly simple workspace. The FME goes off, connects the data, gets the forecast information, and obviously then starts to summarize that down so we can then start to apply that to our model. Now, obviously, there's a 10-day forecast. We've got a lot of poles, that suddenly becomes a lot of information. So whilst the workspace is quite simple, there's a lot of data for it to crunch in the background to actually bring that together. Once we've kind of got that weather information, we can actually start to use some modeling. So, lots of different ways of doing it, but, Python seems to be pretty much the de facto way to do machine learning. FME loves Python. It works really, really well. A lot of the underlying functionality in FME is Python in some shape or form. It's very, very performant. So it's very easy to start to add in additional Python code into FME. We're using the Python caller here. Aditya has come up with an incredibly clever algorithm that I'm not even going to attempt to try and explain, that basically takes all of that forecast information, takes the pole conditions, and then starts to come up with the analysis to say, well, we thought the pole was this, but if we know that this weather event comes along, therefore we now can predict that the pole might now be in this condition. So again, we can then start to dashboard that. So this is just showing you the weather data. So we can start to say, well, this is the forecast we've got coming in. And this is kind of where we're expecting the data. And obviously, as you go through, we can start to filter that down. So the idea is here we're modeling a storm event coming through. So, we've had Storm Emma a couple of years ago came in, obviously did quite a lot of damage. So with these big events, can we start to get ahead? Can we start to predict? So we know what state our poles are in. We can predict what they might look in 5 or 10 years' time. But can we then start to predict what happens with a particular storm? So if we know a storm's forecasted, we know which poles are going to be impacted by that storm, by that forecast. Let's take all of that information. We can run that through the model. Yeah, so if you just jump towards the end, it should show you. So yeah, we can filter, and then that just nicely filters down to show you the storm. So you can say, well, these are the areas that are going to be impacted by that event. And then if you go towards the end, what we can see is we'll have, the health from the survey, but also the forecasted asset health. So you can see there we've got 8 poles that are being forecasted as being, probably in urgent need of view. But actually, after the storm event, we've got 11. So we know there's some additional poles that are coming in that are probably not going to do well with a major storm. And obviously there we've got the information. So we can actually now start to say we've got these poles. These are the ones that are surveyed, but we've also predicting these additional ones are going to be damaged. Therefore, it's a good chance to actually get out and start to take some action. So I just get you to jump on one slide. There you go. So obviously FME can do those kind of things. So it now knows that data. So it's not only a case of writing the data up into the dashboard. So somebody could look at it and go, well, that looks very pretty. That's a really nice little map with some, nice little heat map of points. We actually really wanted to do something. And that's probably one of the key parts for all of this, is not just saying, well, somebody can look at information, it's how do we take action from that information. So FME, can update the assets management system so it can keep that data of that predicted condition up to date. We can also start to raise a work order, for example. So we've got an example there on the right. We can fire a message off to a system to say, this pole is at this state, you need to go and do something. And FME can automatically start to raise those processes and raise those alerts. Or we can start to alert field teams. If we know a storm event's coming, we can start to put people on notice to say, well, look, we know there are assets in your area that are likely to fail. Therefore, here's a heads up that you're probably going to have to go out and do something. Start planning accordingly for this. And obviously all of this can be done off the forecast. So it's very much before the storm hits. It's not reactive afterwards. It's getting ahead of it so that people don't lose services because their poles are in good condition and things. They're not going to fall over or be blown over as part of this process. And obviously, that's a one-time run through. But with FME, you stick it into server, you run it into an automation, and it's always watching. That forecast information is always coming in. We just always capture that. We can rerun the model. You can re-update your analysis. That's always going to change. It can be dynamic. So if things storm gets worse, we might increase the number of poles people have to look at. If it goes down, we can decrease them and things. So we can start to apply all that logic and monitoring behind that. And obviously, the more we capture that data, the more this model becomes self-reinforcing. So obviously the model learns as it goes through time. So the more information it gets, the more we can look at what happened to poles, those condition surveys, all that feeds back in. The model learns, it improves, and obviously then the actions coming out of it improve subsequently. Well, so it's really just that what John was just talking about. It's that cyclic process, always learning, listening, and kind of understanding and picking up what's going on. Yep, that was a whistle-stop tour of how you can do it. There's a lot of complicated stuff there, but actually it becomes very simple. It's just pulling bits together. Didier's done some fantastic work with the modeling side of it to actually get that information.
Oh, sorry, Gavin. I was just getting ready for the next session. I wasn't kicking you off. Yeah, that's great. And I think the predictive analytics, like a big value of that is the the years for years utilities did plan maintenance, which was just replace every pole every 10 years or every asset in every area. But that's just not cost effective these days. So you have to be more, replace the assets that need to replace or maintain that needs to, do reactive maintenance or predictive maintenance so that you're actually saving a lot of money. And I know in Ireland, I think in the Republic of Ireland, there's 2 million poles, electric poles. So again, you can take the kind of maths of these kind of things, and then you've got telecom poles, and it's any kind of asset. It doesn't have to be a pole. Okay, thanks, Gavin. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to hand over to Ciara, who's going to talk about the connecting systems across the organisation in OSI. Morning, Ciara.
Morning. You see that okay?
Yep, all good. It's in presentation mode at the minute. Yeah. See it now. Perfect.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that looks like
Great.
everything to me.
Thanks, Ciaran. As Ciaran said, I'm going to talk about connecting systems across the organisation and specifically ESRI and FME technologies in action in OSI. So those of you who don't know me, my name is Ciara Beddy. I work in Ordnance Survey Ireland for the last 3 years, and my team is product generation, and our main remit is really the automation of both digital and cartographic products coming from Prime 2. So my particular focus today is going to be on a system we use in OSI that's called OnPost route plotting. So I'm going to run through replacing our legacy system, a technical overview of the new solution, look at some of the product outputs coming out of FME, review the user interface, some of the key transformers we used in the system, and then the whole monitoring and management aspect through FME. So as I said, we do have an existing system in place. It was a custom built system, and it generates these postal routes, which consist of both a map and a reporting element. To say the application is beyond end of life is probably being polite. We have a lot of challenges, and you can see here it is no longer supported by the third-party vendor or in-house team. The reporting aspect to produce the reports is based on Oracle 6i and is out of extended support. It does not connect to our own production database, so we needed to maintain a legacy 11G database just to allow that application to function. There's actually 3 database environments that are maintained to support the one application, so a huge overhead on the DBA team. The legacy file format that is used is no longer updated with the latest mapping data. And what that means is it was looking at Prime 1, and as you all know, OSI has moved into Prime 2. And there is a print element to this where reports have to be physically printed, and the old system is hooked up to specific printers and customized drivers are required. So those printers were out of support, and any replacement or repair of those was extremely problematic. So you can see we have a whole range of issues. So when we sat down to design the new principles of a system and what our options are, we immediately decided it should be based on existing system platforms if possible. We didn't want to go out and purchase custom software if we already had the tools in-house to deliver the solution. And we have an enterprise license with FME and also with ESRI. So those were our 2 key softwares that we were going to look at to see if we could produce this system. We wanted it to be scalable to cope with increased demand, and components should not be dependent on specific versions of other components, i.e. when we want to upgrade our Oracle database or we want to swap out printers, we don't want to be tied to a specific version. And finally, the user interface, we want it to be easily accessible, intuitive for the team to use, and ideally web-based. So the 3 key components, we need maps of the route. For the postal workers, we need reports listing all the addresses on those routes, and everything has to be in PDF. So this was the really big one. And I'll lead into the next part saying we did suggest other options that were not PDF, but it was a key requirement for the customer that these outputs were generated in PDF and that they could be printed. So the proposed new system we came up with, we looked at what we had, which was FME and ESRI. We want to amalgamate kind of the best of both worlds to deliver the new OnPost postal route system in OSI. The new solution, and just briefly talk you through this, there's a geodirectory team in OSI. They will access this simple web-based platform where they can input a route ID for generating the route plot. So all they need to do is come in, pop in a route ID. This kicks off a parent workflow. Based on that route ID, 2 things happen. So first, calls go out to our Arc server through the HTTP REST calls to a geoprocessing service. And what that does is it generates the maps on the route. And then all the while, FME is actually also generating quite detailed address route reports in HTML that are then converted to PDF. So those are the 2 key elements. And you can see over here on the right hand side, here's all the PDF output, a lot of maps, and then the key reports. And they're all dropped into a root folder, and the user gets notified that it is ready, and they can print at a later date, or they can it gets automatically printed. So it's quite a nice workflow. It's that simplified. The reporting element is actually quite complex, but FME handled it quite well. FME server then is doing an automated cleanup of these routes, because you can have hundreds of these produced a week, and there's some high level reporting going on figures and numbers of the number of routes being processed. So as I said, ESRI deals with maps. So we have our Arc server geoprocessing services, and they generate the map routes. So you have these overview with our discovery series, and that's the extent of the particular route there. And then we have our large scale mapping with the geodirectory points on top. And I think it's blue if it's on the route and red if it's not. So it's for the postal worker to identify buildings on their postal route. And these are all built through layer files in ArcMap, where we basically specify the content of the map, style it. The geoprocessing service then ties it to the template frame and all the marginalia and converts it into a PDF. So while ESRI does maps, FME does absolutely everything else. So it generates these complex address reports where you've got a lot of cover sheets saying where the post boxes are, the number of buildings on the route, commercial buildings, residential buildings, the delivery office, and so on. And then these long lists of address routes and the sequence in which the postal worker will deliver the post. So these had a kind of quite a detailed rule base behind them and how these are presented for the postal worker. So FME does the reports, and even though ESRI produces the PDFs, FME controls the entire request process to automate the calls for those maps to be produced. So it controls that aspect. It hosts the user interface, controls the automated printing, does all the notifications, and manages all the monitoring and logging. So FME really is the key tool in this system. The user interface itself, as I said, it needs to be simple, web-based. So it is just a web page hosted on our FME server, and the user can come in and do three things. They can request their route, so they can pop in a route number or multiple routes. They can run that route now or overnight, or print and send to specific printers. So the overnight option, that's controlled through Python startup scripts. So the platform that produces these maps, it also hosts our online shop. So all the maps for sale to the online customers go out through the same system. So we try to keep these heavy reports and maps being produced at night, just to reduce the load on the online shop. So basically these Python startup scripts, check if it's 10 o'clock, check if it's 10 o'clock, and once it's 10 o'clock, we process overnight and hope that there's not too many customers on in the middle of the night trying to buy planning packs. We can do single map requests and print. That's the print option that was critical for the team. So that's the process in a nutshell. Some of the key transformers that allowed us to achieve this and the integration side with ESRI was the HTTP caller. So we access our geoprocessing service through the REST API, and the HTTP caller allowed us to do this really quite easily. We just put in the URL and it links directly to this geoprocessing service, and we use the query string parameters here to define what you see over here on the right hand side. FME finds the center point of the map it's trying to generate, what scale it should be at, what the content should be, and what template it should use, and just fires off those requests in a sequence manner to our geoprocessing service to produce the PDFs. So the HTTP caller was key for us. On a side note as well, we do a lot of work with using the Python caller. So if you want to integrate some functions that or tools within ArcMap, the Python caller is another transformer that can call models or call particular ESRI tools as well into your FME workflows. But that's another day's work. Secondly, for us, where I said it had to be PDF. So we are actually generating our reports in HTML. Because the HTML report generator, it's really easy to use, and I know people have discussed it a lot over the years. It's quite dynamic, and it can generate a really nice report quite easily. We did initially look at some of the PDF transformers available, but I think it's PDF page formatter. When you're generating a report that could be up to 20, 30 pages, it just didn't look the way we needed it to, particularly multi-pages and locating where the page should stop and start on the next. So we stuck with generating the reports in HTML, and then we are using this HTML to PDF converter, which is a third-party tool available on the hub. And it's really very good. It's easy to use. You just specify where your HTML report is. You can say what your page size should be, margins around the page, and so on. So we generate a series of HTML output. So you've got headers, the content of the report, and footers. And you can come in and specify some additional parameters to automatically calculate the page number, what your footer size should be, and it's locating there to my specific footers and headers. And it just does a really quick job of merging it all into one single report for us. And it calculates when the next page should start, and that's actually one of 13, that page. So it really did quite a good job of producing that report aspect. And I think that was the key concern from management, that we would have to buy specific reporting software to produce these reports, but FME dealt with it quite well for us. And then the final kind of key transform is system caller. Because we have to be able to print and automatically print these routes off, the system caller was the transformer for us. So it just makes print calls to different printers and times them in a certain sequence for these to be printed off. And without which, if that automated printing wasn't achievable, we wouldn't have got sign off on the system. So that system caller was another key one. As always, FME deals quite well with notifications. So the good ones that you want to see coming in, all the routes have been processed and are available. That's great. But we've done a lot of work with capturing where there can be pitfalls or failures in the processing of the routes. So for example, the following geodirectory route could not be processed as no corresponding route was found in the database. Basically, the user quite often would put in an incorrect route number. So that kind of captures that, sends that back to the end user and allows them to deal with the issue themselves rather than coming to us to find out where the route is. And last but not least, monitoring. So again, really easy, that HTML report generator, just to give an overview of how many of these routes are being processed by month, by week, so management can see the busy periods and plan for staff or printer, paper, ink, and all that kind of stuff. So the result, what we have now is FME and ESRI one integrated solution. We went live in March of this year. It allowed us to decommission 2 servers, an unsupported database, 3 unsupported pieces of software, 2 unsupported printers, all the while delivering up-to-date product to one of our key customers, and most importantly, using existing platforms that we already have in OSI. So we're not going out purchasing additional software, we're using what is available to us. So none of this would have been achievable, I don't think, without FME. And as an integration tool, it works really well, and it is the main tool in this combination for the postal routes. So thank you. That's me, Ciaran.
Thanks, Ciara. That's excellent. That's one question from me. That HTML, the PDF converter, is that a free?
Yeah. It's I think it's the link is on the hub. You have to download a third-party tool, but it's completely free, and it's I think it's quite widely used. And the tool itself was built by one of the guys in Safe, Dimitri. I never know his second name, but he only put it up last year.
Because
but it works really well.
Yeah, because we have a lot of nice HTML workflows, and then then someone says, "Well, I want the static PDF as well."
Yeah,
so not to have to
PDF.
not having to do a PDF writer out and build it, because the PDF builder, Gavin, isn't as nice as the HTML one. So
no, and it's great for maps if you want to create a map, because that's what it's designed for. But yeah, for tables and things like that, it really struggles, as Ciara said. So yeah, that's a really good solution for taking those HTML
I think he only
reports,
popped it up in January last year, but it really works, that it's quick. We haven't had an issue with it to date, and we have hundreds of these things being processed. So
that's excellent. Oh, that's really good. And Is that's completely automated now?
Yes, completely automated.
Oh, brilliant.
So there is somebody who has to go in and put in their route IDs that come from OnPost, but
Yeah,
that's that's about it.
that's fine. Yeah. Okay, guys. I think we're a little bit overdue. So what we're going to do is we're going to move start Frank's session, the next session, at around 25 to 12. So to give people a chance to get a bit of a break, and so we'll start up the next session about 11:30. But we'll just give people a chance. We've caught up a wee bit. We weren't too sure where we were going to end up there. So we're going to start about 11:30, I think, for question. Now Tony has asked Ciara more of a data question. Are road closures on one-way systems accounted for when planning the routes?
We don't plan the routes, so we read the geodirectory database. They supply us nightly with a sync, so they have a team on their side identifying how many addresses are on a route and the sequence of how they visit them. So we only do the delivery of the address routes. I'm sure they do take all those things into consideration on Post's side, but we just deliver out the actual report and map element for them.
Okay. And Jason has asked about the HTML to PDF. Is it usable in desktop? I'm assuming that transformer work in desktop or server.
Yeah, works on both. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Is there any other questions for the guys before we let Ciara and John finish up from this session? If anybody else has any questions, because we won't be bringing them back, we'll let them relax and enjoy the rest of the world tour. Okay, I think not. I just want to say again, thanks to John for excellent presentation, and I think really visionary way of how we should be looking at doing FME, and Ciara for coming back and doing a presentation, even though she's not an IMGS employee anymore. So it was great, and I think it's just showing how FME can automate these manual processes and provide that integration stack. So guys, we're going to close this this session too. We'll